He was a king who walked the earth like a god, a figure of unbroken success whose ambition was as vast as the empires he devoured. For 5 years, Alexander had cut a path of conquest across the known world, shattering the Persian colossus. But in the steaming jungles of India, across the swollen river Hydaspes, his legend would be tested, his invincibility broken, and his life would hang by the thread of a single terrible decision. If you enjoy these tales of tactical genius and world-altering ambition, please hit the like button, subscribe for more epic history, and let us know in the comments where in the world you are watching from. The year is 326 BCE. Alexander the Great had pushed his armies further east than any Hellenic power before him, driven by an unyielding ambition to reach the very edge of the world. His men were veterans hardened by a decade of relentless war, but they were also exhausted, facing terrain, weather, and a foe unlike any they had ever encountered. Standing against him was the king of the Pauravas, Porus. He was a colossal figure, both literally and figuratively, a powerful ruler who controlled a formidable army built around one terrifying weapon, the war elephant. Porus positioned his entire force on the eastern bank of the Jhelum River, the ancient Hydaspes, a body of water swollen and fast-flowing due to the monsoon rains. The river itself became the ultimate defense. Any direct attempt to cross would mean the Macedonians would be butchered in the shallows or crushed by the waiting war elephants as they scrambled onto the slippery bank. Alexander's legendary cavalry, his hammer of victory, would be rendered useless. The undefeated conqueror found himself in a stalemate, staring across the dark swirling water at an enemy he could not reach. Alexander knew he could not wait. He had to deceive Porus into believing no crossing was imminent, forcing his opponent into a dangerous state of complacency. For weeks, the Macedonian king orchestrated an elaborate pantomime. Every night, detachments of cavalry would noisily ride up and down the river, gathering logs and shouting orders, making a blatant display of preparing to cross. Porus, dutifully, would mobilize his forces and position his war elephants to meet the threat. After a few frustrating nights, the routine became predictable. The Indian king grew weary, and slowly, his vigilant response faded. The nightly Macedonian feints became background noise, a cry of wolf that no longer alarmed the shepherd. This was Alexander's moment. He left a significant holding force, led by his trusted general Craterus, in the main camp to continue the nightly charade. Meanwhile, the very best of his army, 6,000 elite infantry and 5,000 companion cavalry, marched 18 miles upstream under the cover of torrential rain and a raging thunderstorm. At dawn, under the shadow of a forested island, Alexander's elite force crossed the river, landing on the vulnerable, undefended flank of Porus's kingdom. The battle began with a rapid clash of cavalry, where Alexander shattered the small Indian scouting force sent to repel him. Porus, realizing the main thrust was upon him, arrayed his army for battle. In the center, forming a living wall, were his 200 massive war elephants, the terrifying beasts poised to meet the Macedonian Phalanx. Alexander's genius lay in his deployment. He did not charge the elephants directly. Instead, he led his companion cavalry in a sweeping, oblique maneuver to attack Porus's left flank. The Indian cavalry immediately wheeled out to counter the threat, forcing them to pull away from their infantry and widening the overall Indian line. This desperate realignment created exactly what Alexander needed, a gap in the Indian formation. The companion cavalry slammed into the exposed flank, followed by the Macedonian infantry. The battle quickly devolved into a horrific spectacle of shock and counter-shock. The elephants initially smashed through the Greek phalanxes, breaking formations and driving the Macedonian soldiers into the mud. But the veteran troops, trained to handle the psychological shock of the beasts, adapted. They focused their long sarissas not on the massive bodies but on the vulnerable legs and eyes of the elephants. Maddened by pain, the titanic beasts turned, trampling friend and foe alike, grinding the Indian infantry into a panicked, disorganized mass. Porus, fighting with the bravery of a true warrior king, was captured, and the Indian forces were routed. It was a legendary victory at Hydaspes, but Alexander was far from finished. His ambition, unsatisfied by a victory that still felt too slow, pushed him forward to the Hydaspes River, the final known frontier. But there, his luck ran out. The entire Macedonian army, weary of the monsoon, the heat, and the endless fighting, mutinied. They refused to go further east. Heartbroken, raging, and forced to turn back, Alexander chose a punishing route of retreat down the Indus River, determined to conquer every independent tribe on his path. He needed to prove to himself and to the world that he was still the unstoppable king. Are you fascinated by the life of Alexander the Great and the power of military history? We explore incredible stories like this every week. If you haven't yet, take a second to hit the like and subscribe buttons now. It helps us bring more epic history to life. Alexander's fury was focused on the Malli, a fierce, warlike tribe whose main city was heavily fortified. The siege was long and brutal, straining the already exhausted Macedonian patience. Impatient with the tactical delay and driven by a need to lead every great action, Alexander committed the greatest act of hubris in his life. He seized a scaling ladder and climbed the city wall himself, followed only by 3 of his trusted men. He was immediately trapped. As the ladders broke under the weight of the men struggling to follow, Alexander found himself isolated on the narrow battlements, facing a horde of furious Malli warriors. He did not hesitate. He leaped down into the courtyard behind the wall, his solitary figure fighting off the surrounding host. For a moment, he was a god of war incarnate, but no man, no matter how great, can fight a whole army alone. Arrows rained down. One shaft found its mark, piercing his chest and sinking deep into his lung. Alexander collapsed against the wall, bleeding from a catastrophic wound. His few companions fought over his prone body, sacrificing themselves to keep the Malli away from their fallen king. The sight of their invincible leader down, bleeding from what appeared to be a mortal wound, plunged the Macedonian army into a desperate frenzy. Breaking through the gates, they slaughtered every single defender in an act of terrible, grief-fueled retribution. Alexander was carried back to the camp on a litter, barely alive. The operation to remove the arrow was gruesome, performed without anesthetic, and for days the vast army stood silent, consumed by fear. They believed their king was dead. When Alexander finally recovered enough to be shown to his troops, his mere presence, pale and frail, yet alive, sparked an explosion of joy. The day Alexander almost died at the Malli siege was the day his men realized their living god was mortal. Yet his heroic hubris, his willingness to face death alongside his men, cemented his final victory and his legend. The greatest conqueror the world had ever known had survived the fatal consequences of his own boundless ambition. This pivotal moment determined the shape of the Hellenistic world. What do you think motivated Alexander to take such a reckless personal risk? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next chapter of Wars in History.